of all the work I've done over the last quarter of a century. The reason I felt I had to do it, I mentioned Gobekli Tepe. We talked at the beginning of this discussion about Plato's Atlantis story and how he said that Atlantis went down 11,600 years ago. 9,000 years before the time of Solon. That's 11,600 years ago in our time. That's the date of the foundation of Gobekli Tepe. It's very set, very clear, absolutely founded 11,600 years ago, exactly the date that Plato gives for the ending of Atlantis. And Gobekli Tepe doesn't fit. It just comes out of nowhere. Out of nowhere. We understand a site like Stonehenge. Makes perfect sense. It's about 4,500 years old, Stonehenge. We know that it was centered in an agricultural community which generated surpluses. Those surpluses allowed labor to be freed. You could fund people to become astronomers or architects or engineers. They didn't need to be producing all the time. So we can understand the social and economic context in which a huge megalithic site like Stonehenge emerged. Go to Gobekli Tepe, you're 7,000 years earlier. The entire area prior to the appearance of Gobekli Tepe is inhabited only by hunter-gatherers. There's no agriculture whatsoever. They haven't built anything ever. And then suddenly, without any background or any preparation, appears this huge megalithic site, which is incredibly sophisticated. Turns out, because a large part of it's still under the ground, seen with ground-penetrating radar, that the whole site is actually 50 times bigger than Stonehenge and 7,000 years older. So how do we account for this? Did a group of hunter-gatherers in Turkey wake up one morning, magically inspired, that they suddenly knew how to cut and quarry stone, move blocks weighing in some cases up to 50 tons, create gigantic stone circles in an area with no water, involving bringing a labor force and organizing that labor force and feeding and watering them, to create the world's first perfectly north-south aligned building, which involves accurate astronomy, to do all of that, and at the same time to invent agriculture, because at the same moment that Gobekli Tepe pops up, suddenly agriculture appears in that same region of Turkey. It's obvious to me that that wasn't a group of hunter-gatherers who woke up one morning suddenly equipped with the skills. What we're looking at is a transfer of technology. This was the survivors of a lost civilization. They already knew how to create megaliths. They already knew how to do agriculture. They settled amongst a hunter-gatherer people who they may have reached out to before. They settled amongst them and they created this project. And this project was to restart their civilization. It didn't quite work. But they got somewhere. They created this huge site. They invented agriculture. We are all the descendants of that. All of the agriculture in the world today began around Gobekli Tepe 11,600 years ago. It's an extraordinarily important moment.
Are these aliens? Are they humans?
No, they're humans. They're human beings.
But came from this and transferred technology over to this other space.
Yes. First of all, it's important to understand that the Earth changes that took place between 12,800 and 11,600 years ago were utterly cataclysmic, beyond all imagining. The science is now in, it's very clear. We had an interaction with the fragments of a very large comet, a giant comet, which originally may have been as much as 100 miles in diameter. It was drawn into the inner solar system about 20,000 years ago. These things come from very far away. They come from a place called the Oort cloud, which is almost light year away. It's so far away. It's so far away. A huge sphere of trillions of comets in the very outer solar system, but disturbances, gravitational disturbances, can send comets out of those safe orbits, winging in towards the inner solar system. It happens from time to time, and the evidence now is that we got one of those, a big one, about 100 miles in diameter, about 20,000 years ago. It entered an orbit that crosses the orbit of the Earth. And for the next 8,000 years, nothing bad happened. They missed each other. But 12,800 years ago, at least 8 fragments of that comet, and we know comets break into fragments. Many of your audience are young, but those who were around in 1994 will remember comet Shoemaker-Levy 9, which hit Jupiter with spectacular spectacular effect. It broke up into 20 fragments. Each one of those fragments hitting Jupiter was equivalent to more than the entire nuclear arsenal of the Earth going off at once. Something similar happened to the Earth 12,800 years ago. At least 8 pieces of this large comet, some of them up to a mile in diameter, hit the Earth. The primary impacts were on the North American ice cap. There were impacts on the Northern European ice cap, and the furthest east that we've documented impacts is actually Syria. 50 million square kilometers of the Earth's surface was devastated by this comet impact. Sea levels rose rapidly, and the Earth's climate plunged into a dreadful deep freeze that lasted 1,200 years. This event was of a scale, of a magnitude, that is quite capable of having wiped out almost all traces of a former civilization. And that's why I think again about what Plato had to say, and I think also about our civilization.